Welcome all. Today I'd like to talk a little bit more about my Zhiyun Crane 3S gimbal. The title here is not incorrectly spelt. After about a week of owning this little toy here and coming back home from about a half an hour session each day, it feels like I've had a good workout in the gym, and so for me it's more of a gimbal than a gimbal, and the pain is going away more quickly and the recovery is a lot faster, so I reckon by a month or so I should be able to romp around quite merrily with this thing fully rigged out. Now today I've got a set of notes here because I forgot to mention quite a few things in my last video, so I don't want to miss out on those this time around. And just out of interest, I'm recording the video via a screen connection to my Olympus camera using an Olympus capture software, so it's actually pretty good because I can see a large image of the scene and press this record start and stop and adjust focus and so on. So hopefully the focus this time around is going to be accurate. Now I've done some bit more research on bits and pieces. Just as a side issue, there seems to be a lot of ways of pronouncing Zhiyun. I found that it's not easily pronounced for a start, and there are many interpretations of how it's supposed to be said, but the closest I could find was you pronounce it somewhat like Zhiyun. Westerners kind of find difficulty with some of those languages because of the intonations and so on, but never mind, the intention is to do the right thing, so nonetheless. Now last week, the video I put up, I shot that at 24 frames per second to just show how it works in probably the worst case scenario. And I did apply some post stabilisation in there, and you could sort of see a bit of a wobbly in a couple of the scenes there, so I left it in, even though it may not have been absolutely ideal, but probably looked a little bit worse without that applied. Now I've done a subsequent video at 75 frames per second, and I'll put that up shortly. And what I did was the start of the video I toned down to 24 frames per second because I did a zoom exercise using the toggle on the camera, and that sort of reveals that the operation of the toggle while it works is not very controlled. It's a little bit of jerkiness going on in there, and I think that's one issue, whereas if it was nicely set up, you should be able to hold it down full bore and then control the speed of zoom so you get a nice in and out without any sort of stop starting. And that stop starting you see is me with the toggle trying to work it correctly, and it's just not really ideal. And then I did some panning motions. One's just by holding the gimbal or the gimbal and swinging it around, and the final scene I just used the little toggle down here to pan from pointing down up to high. So trying a few different motion control things, which is what I probably will be doing and the way I'll be using this gimbal in due course once things return to normal. So it's a bit of practice on my part just to see how those particular aspects work. As I said last week, I'm not into music videos and stuff like that, so I'm not likely to be running around with this gimbal and all that sort of stuff. So it's more moderate type movement and holding and so forth. So it's ideal for that. So I'll show the video now. It's only a short one, and you get a bit of an idea of how the different motions work with the gimbal itself. And I'm still learning, so there's a lot of improvement ahead of me as far as getting these motions and things ideal. So I'll show the video now, and then I'll talk more about a few other things. Okay, that was the video. I don't know what you sort of think about the colour grading and so forth. I'm not exactly a expert on colour grading. I just look at it and say, okay, that sort of looks pleasing. And by the by, that's the sort of the way that I can perform with the gimbal at the moment. Now, one thing that I spoke about last week was the balancing, and how I felt that it's very important to get the centre of gravity of your camera established if you're going to do some balancing, and that's before you actually put the camera on the gimbal or whatever you happen to be using. Yes, when you balance your camera using the correct methodology and all the rest, no matter how you set the camera up itself, you will be establishing the centre of gravity for the gimbal itself. But why I mentioned the fact of finding out where your centre of gravity is that it's a little bit like an aircraft. Take a gimbal to be an aircraft, whether it's a passenger or cargo aircraft. What you notice that they do when they put a load in there, it's all load balanced. They put passengers in a certain sequence by weight category and so on, and then the cargo inside the hold goes in certain ways. They're all weighted out so that at the end of the day, the cargo that goes into the plane, which is in our case the camera, is all centrally balanced. It has a centre of gravity so that the plane itself can operate. Now the plane can operate even if things aren't balanced properly. It's only really takeoff and landing that's more of a critical issue, but even in flight. So yes, you can balance a camera which doesn't have that COG point built up, and it'll compensate for it, but it puts stress and strain onto the gimbal motors itself, just like it would on the engines and wings and ailerons and so on an aircraft. So that's why I mentioned about when you've got a camera set up, try and set it so that you can pick a balance point that's equal around here. As you note on mine, the weight at the back and the front, the lens weight and side by side, they're all sort of balanced so that it ends up being in a very central point on the camera itself. And that makes the balancing then on the gimbal so much easier. As can be seen on here, I've got a fairly big setup, and when I was looking at gimbals, a lot of people had huge difficulty getting a gimbal or a camera to balance on a gimbal. It'd be a Pocket 4K most notably, without resorting to all sorts of counterweights and things like that. And also because they had to put the camera so far forward. Now if that means putting a bit of weight on the front, so be it. I mean, that's what you really need to do to get that balance point right before you actually even start thinking of attaching the camera to the gimbal. Now, I've removed the glass from the front of the lens itself because I found that a bit of a hindrance. I couldn't get to the variable ND, and also it sort of introduced some unwanted flare and that into the softness into the image when you had sunlight and so forth going in there. Some might find it pleasing, but I wasn't too happy with that. So I replaced that with a little weight that I had off a crappy Steadicam or a glide cam, or what you want to call it, and just used the support mount that came with the gimbal itself and just attached that into the quarter hole in there, and that replaced the glass weight perfectly. So it still gave me that balance that I needed, so that the COG of the camera was pretty well centered on the camera body itself, or the whole mechanism. Now what else is there? Oh yeah, with the setup I've got now, my body is able to sit almost flush with the arm itself on the pivot side, and there's about a 4mm gap in there, and I've not seen one person yet able to establish that sort of thing. So I think it boils back down to what I was saying. Try and get that COG set up. That means you can pull the camera back, you can put it in towards the pivot arm itself, away from the motor, and you'll get a far better balancing set. And you don't have to get everything, as I said last time, perfect, because you're not straining the motors with it. Trying to get perfection on a gimbal is just a waste of time. Get the camera set up properly first, and you can have some errors in there as far as the setup goes, and it'll work. And I can just pick this up, assemble it. Well, I don't even assemble the gimbal itself, but I can take the camera on and off as many times as I want, and it's always balanced. There's never any rebalancing required. So the other thing you may not, which I didn't say, and you probably would have noted, I don't use the battery pack with this. And every camera user with a Blackmagic virtually officer that I've seen, if they've got anything attached to the camera, is using the battery pack, because it's sort of they find that they can't use the gimbal just with the 3 batteries inside. I have no problems with that. And when I took the app just to check the balancing, I just used the auto balance in here initially. I think I might have mentioned that last video. And when I checked on the app, the motor was at the lowest setting. So I don't even have to use any higher settings in there, and this thing just works perfectly. So I think it boils back down again to getting that centre of gravity sorted out, and as well that very, very solid mounting of the camera and the lens, so that there are no sort of vibrations that can inherently build up and then start affecting the camera itself. So that's why I wanted to cover that a little bit more, because perhaps I didn't cover it well enough in the previous video. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about here is this is probably more the design of the controls of the gimbal. I've got the motors on there, as I mentioned last time, and they work sort of reasonably well. The zoom motor just tends to have some issues about trying to get the full throw. Sometimes it'll sort of work, and other times it won't. I don't know if it's a power issue or what might be causing it, but I've always got to monitor it to say, did it go fully wide or whatever. But it's not that big a problem because I'm not really using the zoom very much. If I do zoom, it'll be held there. I'm not going to be doing the zooming in and out because that's not a great thing as far as visuals go anyway. But what I would really like is that at the moment the focus motor can only be controlled from the dial at the bottom. There's a little rotating dial up here which is designed for camera operation like the iris and so forth. It'd be nice if that control, and also the other buttons as well, that you could reassign them for different functions. I'm not using this to do any camera control at all, and I'd like to be able to have the opportunity to assign the buttons for different controls so that it makes it a little bit easier for me to go into different sorts of settings without having to just always reach somewhere else. Now that front dial could be used for zoom or focus control, for example. I got the tilt thing for the zoom anyway. Or by pressing a button, you could then use that to cause the gimbal to rotate or tilt. My Fayutechs do exactly that. They've got a control on there with a touchscreen. When you press it, you can go for focus, or then you can press the side thing, and you can actually go for operating the actual tilt arms and so forth. It'd be fantastic to be able to do that again. As I said, reassign the buttons, and so you could say one button will be you're assigning it to motion control, and press another button, you're assigning it to focus or zoom control. I don't see why it couldn't be done, and I think it would make it really, really good if they could do that. The other thing that sort of annoys me a little bit is that with all gimbals, for example, notice that the tripod's not moving, just the handle. This is one of the real annoyances I have with all my gimbals, is that there is no locking mechanism for the tripod foot itself. When you're picking this thing up and putting it down and moving it around and holding it, that will invariably loosen up. And I don't know why there couldn't have been a locking pin like that that's on the handle itself, which locks into the bottom, but the tripod still screws in. Now I had a look at the tripod base. There's actually a hole that goes through, and I thought, oh, I might be able to actually put a little grub screw in there so you can lock the tripod foot in there. But unfortunately, there's not enough purchase on there, and I couldn't get a little rib nut into it to do that because of the way it's been designed. So, you know, in the design phase, they could have actually done that. Put a little solid piece in there, allow a little grub screw to be put into it so you could just spin it in, and you'd have your pin that does exactly the same thing, and it locks the tripod legs onto the gimbal, and especially so you could lock them so that the front leg, where the weight is supporting that part rather than the back side, which is then more prone to tilting. So that's just a little idea that I think would improve the functionality of the gimbal quite a lot, and I don't know why no one does it. Every single gimbal that I've seen has the same sort of thing. It's just a loosely mounted foot. Now, tripods with ball heads and fluid heads all have locking screws so that things don't come loose. It wouldn't take much to do that. The other thing that is sort of annoying is that I wanted to get some trans-mount quick release plates for this, so I could actually put that on there once I get my belt, which is still on its way. But unfortunately, the trans-mount quick releases all only come with a 1/4 inch screw. That's a 3/8. Now I don't want to put a bush in there because it's already got a, which is a good design. Zhiyun have put a helicoil into the alloy screw mount, and the same on the base of that, which means that the alloy won't wear out when you take things on and off. It's actually a very, very good idea. But I don't want to stick now a 3/8 to quarter bush so I can take the trans mount quick release. I don't know why they don't make one with a 3/8 thread on it so that you can actually use them with a gimbal like this, and that would make it a quick release thing. So I could, if I ever needed to use that, which I might, it'd be just a quick release job to take it on and off. So I don't know why they just don't do that. It would really, really change things quite a bit. The other thing I want to talk about, I mentioned the trans mount transmitter, and there it is there. It's actually quite a neat little unit. It worked well with the EM1. I don't want to use it with this because it is more weight and I don't really need to have it on there. But it's just one of those things I think that's been quite well designed, and I think it'll work with any camera. Latency is there, but you know, unless you're a focus puller, it's not going to matter. For things like this, or if you happen to be outdoors somewhere and you want to have a wireless transmission where you're not really that worried about focus, or you've got an autofocus camera, that probably will work extremely well. It's a simple design, works well. The only thing to note is that battery power doesn't have a great endurance. When I was doing the video last week, I just powered it for the internal battery, and that died on me after I think the second time I did the video. So I got a little power pack and put that in there to power it. So it doesn't have a lot of endurance. Obviously the power draw is quite considerable, so that's something to take note of. The handle and collar aren't here yet. I've got the handle, sorry, but not the collar. The small rig collar that fits on there is very hard to get. A lot of places find it unavailable, and finally I got one on eBay coming in from China. I could have got one possibly from Australia, but they want double the price, so instead of $50 they want $100 for it, which is a really inflated price because even in the US it sells for less than 50 AU dollars, and then you add postage to it. So I got it for what, $56 with postage included. I'll wait for it when it comes. It's on its way, I know that, so I'm not particularly worried about having to wait a little bit longer. It gives me more practice with the gimbal and building up a bit more stamina and strength carrying the thing around. So I think that's basically it. I have pretty much covered everything, I think, now. So I'll keep updated with the videos as I find more about it and as I sort of get more comfortable with using this, and also perhaps do some long-term stuff, which I know that a lot of people, reviewers and so forth, they do the one review and that's the last you hear of it until the next new gizmo comes up, as I mentioned last week. This is going to be a long-term product, and I'll be giving long-term views back on how it works and all that sort of stuff, so that it's not just a once and forget item as far as product reviews. And this is not a product review, I don't do those. So hopefully that was informative, and that's all I've got for you this week. So cheers.